Robb Roderick here. Today on TileTV, what I want to talk to you about is substrate prep. It's a huge issue with our industry. You know, I travel all over the country and I do educational programs and I do workshops and I talk to all kinds of tile people, and I'm oftentimes surprised that many people don't know that there are requirements on how flat a surface should be before we put tile on them. Basically, there's two standards I'm going to talk to you about today. One of them is for large format tile, and a large format tile is any tile that's has one side that's 15 inches or longer, and we can see we got a 6 by 36 inch tile right here. It would fall into that category. So our standard for these large format tiles are we should have no deviation. That means no hump or a dip of more than 1/8 of an inch in 10 foot, and we don't want to have any deviation of more than 1/16 of an inch in 24 inches. So we have to have really flat surfaces. The other standard is for the smaller tiles, any tile that doesn't have a side that's 15 inches or more. Kind of similar to this 12 by 12, it would fall into that category. And our standard for these smaller tiles, we should have no deviation of more than 1/4 of an inch in 10 foot. And again, that's no hump or a dip of more than 1/4 of an inch in 10 foot. Also, we don't want to have any deviation of more than 1/16 of an inch in 12 inches in 1 foot. So what that basically tells us is everywhere that we're going to install tile, it's going to require some type of prep, and we need to do it correctly. The next question we ask is, how do we determine it? How do we figure out if it meets that standard of 1/8 of an inch in 10 or 1/4 of an inch in 10? Well, you know, the concrete guys, they've got a lot of fancy stuff. They use lasers, they got FF numbers and FL numbers. Our standard says we should use a 10-foot straight edge, and I'm going to show you how to use that in this episode. All right, guys, I had to take kind of a wider shot because I wanted to get this 10-foot straight edge in here. This is the tool that we use to check our substrate. As most of you guys know, I'm 7 foot tall. You can see this is about 10 foot. We basically take a straight edge like this, a 10-foot straight edge, and put it on the surface that we're going to tile and see if there's any deviations. See if it follows the contour of the straight edge. See if there's any humps or dips, and then we decide what we need to do to fix those to bring it within the standard that it needs to be before we actually start installing tile. Now let's show you how to use it. Okay, here you guys can see we're setting on the concrete and we have this area that there's a dip and you can see daylight coming in underneath it. That's what we're looking for. This particular installation, we can have no more than 1/4 of an inch in 10. It's a 12 by 12 tile. So we need to make sure that we don't exceed that. It looks like this one does. One of the ways we can do that is just take a tape measure and use this tape measure in order to figure out what our gap is. And you can see we're well beyond that 1/4 inch in 10 with this installation, and it's going to require some prep. All right, guys, now we know our standard, and now we know how to determine if our surface meets that standard with our 10-foot straight edge. Inevitably, we're going to find out that there's issues with most every place that we run into. What's next? How do we fix these issues? Well, there's a couple of different ways, but one thing I'll tell you right out of the gate is a lot of guys like to use thin set to fix or prepare floors, or maybe a builder might say, hey, can you just use some more of that gray stuff under that on that low spot? Thin set's not designed to be used in that way. Thin set's designed to be used in a uniform thickness across the floor, and the reason that we don't want to use it for prepping floors is because it shrinks. So we want to use the right products, and the right products in this situation when we're filling dips is cementitious patch, self-leveling, or if we've got enough room in the installation, we can do a whole mud bed, which is a great way to get a really, really flat floor. That's one way, fill in the dips. If we just got a few humps, you know, it may be that we can use a cup wheel grinder and grind down those. We want to make sure and have a great back attachment to contain that dust. There's a real silica dust risk when we don't do that. We want to have a great vacuum and an attachment for our grinder when we do that. If we're hanging board on a wall and we have a stud that's sticking out further than the rest of the studs, one of the things that we can do is just take a planer and trim that extra material off that stud, so when we put our straight edge on it, it's nice and straight and we can hang our board and we don't have any issues with any humps in the wall. Guys, until next time, I want you to be safe, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the road.